Ukraine and Russia have differing approaches to procurement. Today, we will look at the successes and limitations of both models. We will also look at the issues related to Ukrainian and Russian industrial production and scale, and what it means for the U.S. industrial base. We will then sit down with Kate Bondar, a fellow at the Wadhwani AI Center here at CSIS, to discuss these topics and more. I'm your host, Jerry McGinn, and this is All About the Base. There have been a lot of pronouncements about the dramatic successes of commercial drones in Ukraine. Let's get under the hood a bit to more deeply understand what has happened in Ukraine and what are the lessons for both the Russian and Ukrainian industrial bases. First, Ukraine has dramatically simplified its acquisition process. It has reduced onerous acquisition rules, especially for unmanned platforms. For instance, Ukraine adapted and aligned its unmanned capability acquisition processes to commercial product life cycles. Ukraine removed unnecessary procedures, decision milestones, and oversight mechanisms to better align with how drones are developed and acquired commercially. Ukraine's technology update cycle is now incredibly short. In 2022, new technologies lasted on the battlefield for about 7 months. In 2023, that shrank to 5 to 6 months. And last year, it became 3 to 4 months. Now it's just 4 to 6 weeks. Ukraine has been greatly successful at fielding commercial technology. Its innovation primarily exists in the commercial sector, which moved from a wholly state-owned R&D model. Acquisition has devolved to individual units in the field, so commanders can buy what they need when they need it. Moreover, using commercial technology allows deployment of readily available off-the-shelf products, reducing often long wait times. Commercial technology, mostly unmanned systems, now account for nearly half of Ukraine's defense procurement spending. However, there are obstacles to this approach. First, it experiences rampant decentralization. Military units individually procure what they need, which makes it difficult for the state to develop or integrate military products acquired by different units. Second, it's impossible to scale. The prominence of small businesses producing drones, components, software, and services are of questionable quality, and they mostly served as assembly workshops. This builds incompatible systems without common standards or modular architectures, and that hurts electronic protection and other capabilities. Third, poor strategic planning. Ukraine operates on a startup model that doesn't scale because its goal isn't scalability, but rapid prototyping and problem solving. Russia, on the other hand, has experienced a relative success recently in scaling production. First, its highly centralized planning process draws on budgets outside of spending allocated to the Ministry of Defense, especially through investment in machine tooling, training, and logistics. Second, Russia has high industrial output due to new manufacturing facilities and the use of commercial production lines for military purposes. It has also benefited from increased imports of Iranian and Chinese technologies. It is not clear whether Russian drone strikes have become more effective, but this chart demonstrates the scale of them has significantly increased. If you look from 2020, the beginning of 2025 to the end, you'll see that Russian drone strikes have dramatically increased. Now, their effectiveness, which is in red, has increased, but only marginally so. So the overall effectiveness is not clear, but they are getting a lot more drones in theater. Third, like Ukraine, Russia has rapid cycles of innovation through technology adaptation and development of new capabilities. Russia, for instance, has improved its strike efficiency through new electronic countermeasures against Ukrainian jamming technology. Now, what does this mean for the Ukrainian and Russian industrial bases, and what lessons can we draw from this for the U.S. industrial base? Let's sit down with my CSIS colleague, Kate Bondar, to discuss this. Kate, you've spent years looking at Ukrainian and Russian industrial bases. Can you give us your perspective on where things are heading?
Yeah, so Jerry, as you rightfully mentioned, these two military-industrial bases they have their similarities and differences. So they both started with Soviet-inherited military-industrial bases. These two countries were parts of Soviet Union. So they have similar foundation, let's say. At the same time, with the full-scale invasion, both countries faced the same issues. So in Ukraine and in Russia, we've seen the emergence of new military-industrial base, mostly represented by startups. They're small little companies, and basically none of the military knew how to adopt this innovation. So they faced the same challenges. But the question is, and the difference is, how they managed to solve these issues. So how these two countries actually adopt innovation. And that's where the main difference is. So Russia has adopted a centralized approach. Ukraine has adopted decentralized approach. And I can expand on this a little bit. So in Ukraine, what we call the decentralized approach. Basically, in the beginning of the war, the old school acquisition system couldn't adjust so quickly, couldn't change the procurement system, couldn't change requirement system, budgeting process, etc. But there was a necessity to buy these systems from non-traditional vendors, basically sometimes not even from companies, but from volunteers and groups of people who were assembling these drones. And what the Ukrainian government has done, they gave procurement authority to these military units. So they had their own budgets and they had their own procurement authority, which means they could just go and buy these drones from anyone who needed. Whereas in Russia, the Ministry of Defense was still coordinating this process. And for them to adjust their much bigger military system, much bigger acquisition system, to buying directly from startups was much harder. So they made their focus on selecting companies and selecting specific systems and putting all resources behind them and actually adjusting their procurement to buying from these selected suppliers.
Great, great. So for Ukraine is obviously, they've taken that more commercial approach and decentralized. Have you seen limitations in how they do that? I mean, the technology seems to refresh a lot, but what are some of the challenges that they're having with that approach?
Of course. So the main challenge is that currently this new private defense military-industrial base consists of almost 1,000 companies. So can you imagine scale and production across all these companies? It's just impossible. So first of all, the number of new vendors. You have to standardize approach, you have to standardize their products, you need to codify their products, you need to test and evaluate, and you need to put them into service, basically. That was one issue. Another issue is to ensure that all these systems integrate and basically talk to each other. And that's what Ukrainians call a zoo of technology right now, because they have so many vendors, they have so many companies, so many technologies, but it's really hard to ensure that they integrate and they're interoperable between each other and among each other, and for the Ministry of Defense to actually coordinate all this process and to identify which systems perform better, what should be procured, and how to plan long-term strategically.
Now, are they trying to get after that, or are they just trying to deconflict right now? Are they looking to try to scale, or are they just trying to do the best they can with these challenges?
Yeah, so the Ministry of Defense quickly realized that they are absolutely, let's say, blind about what's happening in procurement and what do all these military units actually buy. So what their military is fighting with. So the Ministry of Defense took an approach, a very Ukrainian approach, because Ukraine is a very digital country, and the answer was in digitalization. So they decided to digitalize this procurement process by creating so-called marketplaces. And that's a very good answer, because you create a marketplace where you place all vetted manufacturers with their systems, and you allow these military units to buy from these marketplaces. So how this solves the issue? The Ministry of Defense now sees what technologies are bought. It's one side of the problem. Another side is that these digital platforms, they can aggregate orders coming from different units. And by aggregating these orders, they can place and they can award bigger contracts to the manufacturers. So given bigger contracts, manufacturers can scale their production and reduce price. So that's how Ukraine is trying to achieve, first of all, a little bit of centralization of this process, and second, basically scale in production and giving their manufacturers an opportunity to produce more and to plan their supply chains and production a little bit in advance.
And it sounds like that approach also would allow the ability for more standardization of at least systems so we're buying kind of like vetted vendors and the like. Is that fair to say?
Yes, of course. So what this vetting means in Ukrainian terms is not complying with some sort of standards which were developed, theoretically, but this vetting is what actually works on the battlefield. So that's the main criteria right now, not some imaginary or theoretical requirements which come from the general stuff. They come from the battlefield, and they're based on actual performance and actual need with what's happening on the battlefield.
Okay. And the Russian approach, you say, is different, obviously. They take a more centralized approach. And what kind of successes and challenges are they having on their side?
Yeah, so we can look at the example that you have shown, the drone production based on attacks on Kyiv and on Ukraine. So basically, that's the main platform is Shahed drone, right? So Russia has made a bet, let's say, to one system, and constantly improves this system. And it's not only about technology development, it's about building production facility. We know Abaluga, right? It's about training workforce. It's about improving technology. It's about constant iteration and building supply chain and resources behind this one selected company and one selected technology. And we can see this approach across all military industrial base. Of course, in Russia, this startup community also exists, and it's called People's VPK, Народный VPK, which is basically all these small little companies producing small drones. But bigger systems, which are more expensive and which are mostly produced by state-owned military industry and defense industrial base, they are very selective, and they put all resources behind these systems. Zala drones, for example, it's a company which is connected to Kalashnikov, and they have big orders, and they constantly improve their loitering munitions and ISR drones. Now we find that they really integrated AI, and that's why these systems become even more effective on the battlefield. So Russia doesn't scale its military industrial base to hundreds of companies like Ukraine does, but it puts everything behind selected small little number of companies, but allowing them to scale production and produce in huge numbers, which gives them advantage on the battlefield.
It seemed like the chart that we showed, it seems like the Russians, they're producing a lot more, delivering a lot more, but the rate of the hits it doesn't seem like it's raising that much. It seems like it's sort of a stalemate with these two approaches. But is either country developing a competitive advantage in your view by their respective approaches?
It's a constant race, because when we see increase in numbers from the Russian side with their attack and striking capability, Ukraine answers with drone interceptors, with different approaches to creating the mobile groups which intercept those drones, and also scaling air defense. So that's why, it's really hard to say which system has an advantage, because for every measure there is a countermeasure which comes in a couple of weeks or months, for example. But strategically, I would say that Russian approach shows more resilience and sustainability, let's say, just because, to manage this huge amount of companies for many years and to manage this huge ecosystem proved to be not very effectively. And that's why Ukraine is taking this approach and direction into centralization right now. So probably that's a sign which system more or less, what we can say, effective as of now.
Good. Now, so what does this mean for the United States? There are some that say that we have to adopt the Ukrainian model of commercial technology, immediately, but then there are others that say that it's not an appropriate kind of comparison because some of our conflicts would be longer distances and so on. So, what should we be thinking about as we look at this example?
I don't think that any example from another country can be just copy and pasted here or in any other country, because situation is specific, theater is specific, starting positions are different, etc. But I think that any military in the world basically need to watch the patterns that we see in this conflict. The patterns, by patterns I mean, for example, electronic warfare. That's the pattern which will be present in any conflict, in any big war. And now we see that China is placing their electronic warfare capabilities in artificial islands near its shores. So basically they're already starting to create this denied environment in potential theater where they envision some clashes or conflict, future conflict. So a usage of unmanned systems. It doesn't mean that, everyone needs to deploy FPV drones in millions, but it means that capabilities are becoming more and more unmanned just because for benefits that it brings. It reduces price, you don't need to train people, et cetera, et cetera. So these are the things that I mean by patterns, and we just need to watch what is happening there and to integrate and adapt lessons that we can see and adapt our strategy to these patterns, which will be present in any future conflict. But it cannot be copy and pasted here.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I think it's sort of an action and reaction, develop a strategy, and then the enemy counters, and there's a lot of cycle in manned, unmanned, counterpoint. So really appreciate your perspective, Kate, and on both of these countries and what it means for the U.S. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So that's our episode of All About the Base. And it was great to talk about Ukraine and Russia and what it means for the U.S. industrial base. So stay with us, and we'll see you next time. And remember, it's all about the base.